Welcome to the Book Brilliant podcast. This is Matt with an episode that I am extremely excited to bring you today. I've got Pastor Luke Pierson from Apologia Church and Apologia Studios. They're based out of Tempi, Arizona, and I actually discovered them one day randomly on YouTube, and I was super impressed. They would debate anyone, anytime it seemed like. They would go to militant atheist conventions, they would talk to Mormons, they talked to Jehovah's Witnesses, and I was just really impressed. I'd never seen anything like that before. I didn't know what apologetics were. I didn't know any of that. And so they really added a whole other element to my belief. At the time period, I just kind of become baptized. And so they were very influential for me, and I so appreciate them and the content that they put out. So again, it was huge for me to have Luke on. If you go to bookbrilliant.com and you take a look at the show notes, I will have every book that we reference linked there. So if you want to check it out, please do so. But I hope that you enjoy this episode as much as I enjoyed having him on. All righty, everybody. Thank you for listening. I've got Luke Pierson from Apologia on today, and I'm very excited about it. Luke, thank you for coming on.
Yeah, my pleasure, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, so my first question is going to be quite divisive. Does anybody actually call Jeff Durbin the Ninja?
Just Jeff.
That's kind of exactly what I thought.
No, people do. People do. I'm just kidding. He gave him. I always joke that he gave himself that nickname. If you're an OG, I just found out, an OG Apologia follower, so you might remember those shows where we joked about him giving himself that name. But other people do call him that. I'm kidding.
That's funny. I've heard people call you the Bear before, but haven't heard anybody call him the Ninja yet. So
yeah, no, I pretty much that's what I go by. So. Like we were just in Nashville at the Fight Laugh Feast, and I literally probably heard, I don't know, 20, 30 times someone come up and be like, "Oh, now I know why they call you the Bear." So wow. Yeah,
that's awesome, man.
Yeah.
Well, so I'm not as familiar with your background and
Sure.
testimony and how you ended up at Apologia. So I was wondering if you could kind of share that a bit.
Yeah, for sure. I'll give you the short version. My great-grandparents were missionaries in Africa, where my grandfather was born. My grandfather and grandmother went back. They were medical missionaries in the Belgian Congo. My mom was actually born in the Belgian Congo. She truly is African American. She has dual citizenship, and so there's a long story there. But so point being, I grew up in the church, and even recently discovered that I actually have a long Christian heritage on both sides of the family. Didn't know I had that on my dad's side till recently, but so grew up in a Northern Baptist church in Michigan, where I'm originally from. And I say Northern Baptist is basically the same as Southern Baptist, but with a heap load more legalism attached to it. And so grew up in there, was always at church, always loved being at church. I said a prayer when I was 4. I vividly remember it. Don't think I was really saved then. I think, I did the typical ask Jesus into my heart, didn't want to go to hell sort of a thing.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure I really understood the gospel, but, I always say somewhere between 4 and 19.
Yeah.
15-year stretch there. Reason I picked 19, my wife and I, so we got married when we were 21, but our mutual best friend, who she actually grew up with in the church, came to Christ when we were 19, and his uncle, who was a hardcore MacArthurite, began discipling us, and that's when I really fell in love with theology and evangelism and stuff like that. So, that's when it might just be because I was 19, I was kind of, getting out of high school into college and becoming my own person, you know what I mean? And like, kind of out from under my parents' wings and stuff. And, so that's probably has something to do with it, but that's when I really just, got excited about being a Christian, and not that I wasn't before, but, anyway, so yeah, that's kind of my testimony in a nutshell. It's always been life to me, being a Christian and being in the church and stuff. And, so like I mentioned, I was originally from Michigan, but I actually grew up in Northwest Indiana, about 30 miles southeast of downtown Chicago.
Okay.
So I always tell people I'm from Chicago. It's basically basically everything there was Chicago TV and all that stuff. So I ended up moving out here. Like I said, my wife and I got married when we were 21, so we just did 19 years. And we moved out here to Arizona about 15 years ago, almost 15 years ago. And the reason being, my wife's whole family came out as a long story there, health stuff. And we followed so my wife could be with her mom and help her and stuff. And so I actually met Pastor Jeff at this other church when we first, there was the first church, it was actually the second church we visited, but we ended up becoming members there and serving there and with the youth group and children's church and, whatever, all kinds of stuff. And Pastor Jeff was actually leading the college group at the time. And again, there's a long story, but I'll spare the details there. But that's where I met Pastor Jeff. And then we, through a series of God-ordained events, ended up planting Apologia Church out from that church. And we actually started Apologia Christian Ministries first, just doing outreach, and then planted the church in February of 2010. So going on 12 years. And so it was my family, his family, and Joy the girl. If you follow, that's about it. And a bunch of ex-drug addicts. So yeah, that's kind of how I got into that. There's a whole long story there that I'll tell you another time.
No, so did you and Jeff pretty much start together then? I know he had started off doing the, drug rehab.
Yeah.
So was it you two together then?
Yeah. Yep.
Oh, wow.
Yep. So he was actually he actually just walked in here sneaking his stuff. I don't think he's on camera, but so trying to spare you all the boring details, but he was on staff at a drug rehab down in downtown Phoenix here, and was a chaplain there. And long story short, the church we were at, the senior pastor and the two other pastors, the senior pastor was asked to resign, the other two pastors left, so it kind of went, from about 500 people to like 50 people very quickly, and it was a big mess. But basically, Pastor Jeff started teaching on Sundays, and he was at the rehab, and we both took over the youth group, and over a year-long process, it started to grow again, it started to be a healthy church again, and then there was another series of events I won't get into now, but we ended up just like when I said it was God ordained, I mean it. And like there was a bunch of we were literally putting out fleeces one after another. I'm like, all right, God, if you want us to do this, then give us this. And he just kept doing that to the point where we had no other option but to plant Apologia Church. And yeah, so the other church technically laid hands on Jeff, sent him, and then he laid hands on me first service with Apologia Church. And originally I was the youth pastor, and then eventually now I'm the discipleship pastor. So I've kind of grew out of that. As the church grew, there was a more need for discipleship. So, yep.
That's cool, man. I had kind of wondered about that. What building did you guys start in? Did you start in like a coffee shop or something, or did you have an actual building?
Family building at the rehab.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. I mean, that was literally the last fleece was, we're like, well, we need a building. We need somewhere to meet. And so Jeff went into work one day and was like, hey, we're, thinking about doing this. And, could we use the family building? And his boss was like, sure. When do you need it? And he was like, Sundays, Tuesdays, Thursdays. Sure. How long do you need it? And we're like, 2, 3, 4 hours at a time. He's like, sure, not a problem. And we're like, well, how much? It's free. Don't worry about it. And so that's where we started. We were there for about 6 months, 8 months. And then we ended up moving and renting from a Lutheran church after that. So
very nice.
Yep.
It's kind of crazy when you're talking about your great-grandparents being missionaries in Africa. My great-grandparents were actually missionaries in Africa as well.
No kidding.
Yeah, in Liberia.
Okay.
My grandma was born there. I think they were medical doctors as well.
Really?
My great aunt has all of their letters, and she combined them into like a legitimate book. I'll take a picture of it and I'll send it to you after this because it's
Very
cool. So that's fascinating, man. I did not know that. So
do you happen to know what mission they went with?
I don't. I'll send you all that. I'll message you that after this because it's probably around the same time period that your great grandparents.
Sure. Yeah.
So yeah, like I said, my grandma was actually born in Africa. So yeah.
Oh, in Liberia.
Yeah. I believe it's Liberia. I need to finish the book, and this is the thing about it. Like I keep telling myself, if my great aunt passes away before I finish the book, and then I read the book and I have questions, I'm gonna, be mad about it the rest of my life. So yeah. I need to finish it, but as you can see behind me, I've got a lot of books I need to.
Yep, to I'm with you.
So yeah, well, I wanted to ask, for me listening to you guys for just about 10 years, there's been different questions I've always wanted to ask, and so one of them, I came from a bit of a more charismatic background.
Okay.
My dad went to the Vineyard churches for a while in Nebraska. He actually met John Wimber in the late 80s. I'm sure my dad will be in the YouTube comment section too. And my dad had these stories of pretty fascinating stories of healings and demonic possessions and things that I believe, it's my dad. I believe him. And I think a lot of the times when you hear some of those stories that they're not very believable.
Sure. Especially on TBN.
Yeah. And so I went to, when I really began taking the faith seriously again, the church again was pretty charismatic. And I realized I don't really like the dramatic parts of it. Some of the stuff that Cultish has talked about with Bethel was some things that I could relate to on certain levels that, I could go on about some of the things that I witnessed that ended up not being legitimate, But I do. One thing that I've been struggling with for a long time is trying to figure out, what's that balance? And I've been chipping away at Charismatic. I've actually got it right next to me. Charismatic Chaos by John MacArthur and Strange Fire as well. I've got it. I was going to finish Charismatic Chaos first, but some of the stuff that he says on there are great points and everything, but I guess what I've been really wondering for a while is, well, where did all the demons go? My current pastor, he's kind of like, look, I'm not interested in power encounters. I'm interested in a truth encounter. Sure. I don't think it has to be this dramatic thing. I think it's better to speak the truth into their life. And I know that I kind of know how Reformed Baptists are along these lines, but I also know that when you guys started church planting in Hawaii, if I recall, you kind of had some experiences that somewhat have maybe changed your perspectives. What's your take on all that?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I actually can answer this very quickly because we do membership classes quarterly, and this is usually a question that pops up. So I have it locked and loaded, but we unofficially are what we describe ourselves as soft line cessationists. MacArthur would be a hard line cessationist. So what that means is that simply what that means is that we would never say that God couldn't use the sign gifts. Still, if he wanted. Now we would say that they, overall were for a time and a purpose, to, push the gospel forth into the world. But we would never say that God couldn't still use those gifts. I think a lot of the stuff on, like I mentioned, TBN, you see that on TBN, stuff like that, like Benny Hinn, stuff like that. Like it's fake. It's not real. It's not even biblical. There's very clear guidelines in scripture for how those things, especially speaking in tongues, that's the big one, how those should go down. Which, by the way, speaking in tongues was a communicable language, not gibberish, not babble. They knew what they were saying. We would say we're not really seeing that being used appropriately or biblically. But, I have always said this, like, I would hope that, like, if I went on a missions trip in the jungle in Chile or wherever, there's a tribe there, I would hope that if I was giving them the gospel, in English, that God would give me the gift of tongues so that they could hear the gospel in their own language, which is what the gift of tongues was. So, and I don't know if you've seen, I'm trying to remember when within the last year anyways, we put out a video with John Barros. I don't know if you know who he is. He's one of our heroes in Florida. He's been going to the abortion mill every day for like 20 years or something. Yeah. And just in the last couple of years, there was an example of him, a baby being rescued through his gospel preaching. The family drove by one day, and he didn't even know this had happened. This happens sometimes. There's saves that you don't even know about, but this family drove by and, saw him and started saying stuff to him in Spanish. Long story short, they heard him preaching to them in Spanish, and he doesn't speak Spanish. He was preaching in English. Yeah. Right. And so there's a modern example of, the gift of tongues. So, yeah, that's where we would stand on that. I mean, I'll be honest, I was challenged, on this, 4 or 5 years ago. Anyways, within the last 5 years, we were up in Canada, visiting our friend Joe Boot at his church in Toronto before they were completely communist. And, he was preaching through, I think it was 1 Corinthians, if I remember correctly. And, he was talking about the sign gifts and stuff. And he shared this example of, because I know that's what it was, because it was about prophecy. Because I think in that passage, I think the gift of tongues can be explained very easily. The gift of prophecy is a different animal, and I know, me personally, I've had a hard time reconciling that, and I was really challenged, and he shared a really great example of a pastor that he knew, just a solid Reformed. I don't know if he's Reformed, but a Baptist preacher that was not at all charismatic. Right. And so his example he shared was, he was preaching in a church that wasn't his church, didn't know anybody there except maybe the pastor, and while he's preaching, he sees a man sitting on one side of the church and a woman sitting on the other side of the church. And it was like the Spirit was telling him, those two are having an affair. Yeah. And, so after, he was really grieved in his spirit, and he was I need to tell the pastor, and he did. And sure enough, he was right. And it was just a weird thing like that, where it's okay, I think that would be an example of God giving someone the gift of prophecy. But again, it's such a hard one, because everyone that calls himself a prophet right now, they're false prophets. Right. And it's Deuteronomy has some very harsh things to say about false prophets. And, even when someone says to me, well, God told me, I'm well, you should be careful on how you say that, because you don't want to speak as a prophet for God. And if your prophecy is false and doesn't come true, he says you should be put to death. Yeah. So we should be very careful about throwing that language around. I'm much more comfortable with saying, the Lord laid it upon my heart, or even I was being led a certain way or whatever, but we should be very careful to say, well, God told me, because you don't want to speak as a prophet and be wrong. Yeah. So that's kind of my answer in a nutshell. Hopefully that is helpful.
Oh, no, I know exactly what you mean. And I'm not, I don't really care as much about the, people talk about the gifts or modern day apostles or this and that. What the balance that I've been trying to figure out is, how much should the church be doing healings? And,
gotcha.
How big of a deal is it? So I would imagine, and I have a second part to this question, but I would imagine that you guys probably pray for somebody if they're sick or
absolutely.
I would imagine. And then, the other thing, and I don't know, as far as the gift of healing, that's a whole other thing where people feel like they're ordained, that when they pray for people, they automatically become healed or whatever. But the other one is really trying to figure out, well, how big of a role should, praying for the demon possessed be for the church? Because it seemed like for Jesus, that was a big deal. I think the thing with demon possession is that people can get into this mindset of going demon hunting. Yeah. And then they see a demon behind everything. Yep. And so it's trying to figure out, what's that balance? And I think like what my pastor said, I think it makes sense. Even if he's talking to somebody who he thinks, hey, this guy I think's got, has some spiritual issues, rather than address it head on and have some big screaming and weird match or whatever. I'm just going to, it's more of a logical approach, kind of like Neil Anderson. Have you ever read any of Victory Over the Darkness or anything about Neil Anderson? He's kind of, he talks about how he's like a doctor who, while he was in school, he saw, hey, some things are issues with the brain and they need counseling, or they're a physical problem with the brain. But because he was a Christian, he was like, these other things seem kind of spiritual. And so I like the people that I find logical. I find Neil Anderson logical. I really like, and I find Jack Deere logical. MacArthur slams him in his book, but I think behind the scenes, I think they've always been kind of friends. But Jack's book, he's got Surprised by the Power of the Spirit. I don't know if you're familiar with him at all, but he came from like Dallas Theological Seminary. Okay. And he was totally against any of the gifts, anything supernatural, and he kind of changed his mind. And so I've been listening to kind of both extremes, the MacArthur, and then I've been listening to the people who are not like Benny Hinn, but more reasonable about it.
Gotcha, man. Those are two really great points there. So I'm going to try to separate them in my mind so I don't confuse the two topics. But the first thing about healing, I mean, I don't know if you're familiar with Jeff's son August that they adopted. He'll be 2 here in December. Like, he clearly had spina bifida in the womb. There's ultrasounds where you can see a hole in the spine.
I remember that. Yeah.
And we prayed like crazy for that kid, and he came out totally fine. Like, the doctors were bewildered. They did not understand what had happened. Yeah. And so absolutely, God can perform miracles, but here's the thing is like, God performs the miracles.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And again, going back to what I said earlier, like, I would say the gift of healing was probably something given for a certain time, because, if you think about it, like, no one knew who Jesus was in the or the New Testament. No one knew who Jesus was, but if you came and you healed someone, they might listen to you, so like, God used that for sure to like spread the gospel. But then you have guys like Todd White, who says that he's like extended people's legs, it's just like, it's like, I know. And I don't want to slay him, because actually Jeff's met him. I've met his daughter. He's a really sweet guy. Like, really? Last year, if you remember the video last year where he was repenting and stuff, I haven't heard much from him since then, but like, I hope that was true and genuine. Like, he was really repenting of that and stuff, but he's a really sweet guy. Like, I'm sorry, I have a hard time believing that God's using it to like lengthen people's legs. That's really seems a little shady to me. And so like, when you start getting into that charismatic stuff, like, I have an aunt on my mom's or my wife's side. Oh, I hope she didn't hear that. My wife's side, not my mom's side, who, has a disease, and she's kind of very charismatic, and was at, probably 20 years ago, was at church, and, they said they prayed over her and healed her, and she said she was healed. We'll come to find out it was not the case. She didn't get healed of her disease. So like, stuff like that, you got to be really, really, really careful about. But, again, absolutely, we're constantly praying for God to heal, to work miracles, but it's Him. He's doing the work. There was a man, an example of why that thought process is really bad. There's a man, actually, we have a video from years ago on Apologia Studios, a friend of ours named Charlie Kingston, who was raised FLDS, and he came to Christ. Well, he ended up getting a brain tumor, and then like aggressive, and he died very quickly from it. But like, we interviewed him. The point I'm getting to is, we were one day praying over him. We anoint people with oil. We were praying for him, and I actually have a bottle of Jerusalem oil in my bag with me all the time in case I need to go. I used to be able to go to the hospital to pray for people. I can't now because of COVID, but if someone's at church or whatever, I can whip it out and we'll anoint them and pray over them. But we were praying for him, and him and his wife were very distraught one day. And they had a friend that was like very charismatic, kind of word of faithy type stuff, and she straight up told him that he wasn't being healed because he didn't have enough faith. And it was like, man, that is just awful and dangerous. And so like there's a balance there, but again, it's not us, it's God doing the work, it's God performing the miracles.
Yeah.
And so yeah, that hopefully that answers that side of the question. Then as far as the demon stuff, like I'll be honest, I don't even like when you talk about like charismania and charismatics, like I don't even include demons in that because like absolutely they're for real. Absolutely there's spiritual warfare. And I'll be honest, the book actually that changed my mind, because I grew up again very conservative Baptist. Like the book that changed my life was by Tony Evans, out of Dallas, and I completely just lost the name of it. This was probably 20 years ago. I can't remember the name of it now, but he just went through scripture. It was just a matter of literally just looking at this topic through scripture. And Tony Evans wasn't a charismatic dude, really, and I think it might have just been called Spiritual Warfare.
Was it Victory in Spiritual Warfare?
Maybe that was it, yeah. And it was a really good book, and like literally it was just an exegetical book through scripture, really. And like I mean, so there's extremes on both sides. There's the extreme I grew up with where like none of that stuff ever happens, and there's the extreme, some of the stuff you talked about where people are like looking for it, and even in counseling people, we try to be very careful, because there are definitely times where if I'm meeting with someone, I'll be like, man, I think you're going through some spiritual warfare, like some oppression. When people start experiencing thoughts and things external to them, thoughts they wouldn't normally be having. And you mentioned Kauai. I didn't actually experience any of that, but Pastor Jeff did. His wife did. A number of other people I know experienced stuff like that, where there was just, like the New Testament calls Satan the accuser, and that's one telltale sign of that is you start having thoughts like you're worthless, you're awful, stuff like that, where you're like, whoa, like what was that? Where'd that come from? That's definitely, I would definitely label that as spiritual demonic oppression. Now again, as Christians, we can't be possessed, but we can be oppressed, and just weird stuff like that. So yeah, absolutely, it's something that's real, but we want to be very careful, because what can happen, and I've seen this in counseling, is then people start blaming demons for their sin. And it's like, well, you still need to own your sin, but like, and a lot of times it ends up being like stuff with like depression and stuff, just really dark negative thoughts. It's like, no, you're just being sinful and not trusting God. But there's definitely times where I'll say, we want to be careful about this, but that seems very demonic to me. So that's a great question, and that's how I look at it. I mean, we just want to look at it through the lens of scripture. We don't want to give demons too much credit. But this actually is something I've talked about a lot the last, I don't know, 2 or 3 years. I mean, you look at the New Testament, right? Well, you look at the Old Testament, and then the quiet period between the Old Testament and Jesus coming. And there's like, even in the Old Testament, like you never see anything really about demons. There's no demonic anything really, right? So there's there's that 400-year period or whatever between, like Satan and his minions had, some reign of the earth, right? And then all of a sudden Jesus shows up and they're freaking out. Right? You see them like they're freaking out, and Jesus is casting them out of people left and right, into swine and into the sea. Like they knew what was up. You know what I mean? They're like, they knew who Jesus was, and like this life that we have here on earth, like this is, if you're a Christian, like this is a battle for ground, right? Because Satan was, prior, and we're going to get into, I don't want to get too far into eschatology here, but like Satan was the prince of the earth for a minute, and he had reign of stuff. I would say he's bound now, but like, so this is a battle for ground, literally. And so that's why the demons are freaking out. They knew who Jesus was. They knew what his arrival meant for them. And so, yeah, absolutely. Everything we're engaged in is a spiritual warfare to some degree. And so, yeah, I think that's a really great question. And I'll shut up there because I'll get going too far in another direction.
No, that's awesome. You're like, I don't want to get too far into eschatology, and I thought I do, but because you guys have been, I've been listening to a lot of your stuff on that, and I'll bring that up later. But I have an example. I'll share this. This is an example of what I think spiritual warfare kind of is. I think a lot of the time is it's a distraction. I just preached my first sermon ever.
Nice.
About a month or two ago. And leading up to that week, I called up my pastor and I'm like, dude, I don't know what's going on, but I just feel like really sad mood. And my pastor's like, I know what your problem is. Yep. And I'm like, what? And he's like, you're going to preach. And I was like, dude, I'm not scared of talking in front of the church. And he's like, no, it's spiritual warfare.
Yeah, sure.
So this story is a bit wild. And again, I'll explain why I'm telling it, because I don't want to tell a demon story just for the sake of telling a demon story. But so the night before, I'm doing my sermon, and my wife was out at another lady for church. My wife does some of the bookkeeping, things like that. And so they were doing that together, and they were out later than expected. So I've got two boys, a 3-year-old and almost a year-old now, another year-old boy. I put my 3-year-old to bed. He never has issues sleeping, things like that. He never gets scared of the dark, whatever. So I'm working on the sermon. And he's kind of crying, and I go into his room, and he says, I don't like that noise. And I was like, oh, was it a dog? I don't know what the noise was. Go back to sleep, So I leave. My wife gets home, and he starts crying again, and he says, there's a monster in his room. And at this point, I'm kind of like getting the hair raised a little bit, because I'm like, that's weird. He never says that, before. So my wife and I go in there, and we just start. I just grabbed my Bible and just started reading scripture, just kind of random stuff about the blood of Jesus, right? It happens again, but this time he's really freaking out, and he's saying there's a black monster in his room. So by this point, I'm like kicking the door open in there, and we pray, and my wife stays in there with him and whatever. And I was spooked out, but I was also kind of like, this is pretty obvious.
Sure.
And so then I keep working on the sermon. And then at the time he was 10-month-old, then he starts crying. And so then I go up and I'm praying, and I get him back to sleep. And so then I go to my library, and I start going through books, and I'm like, what's a good spiritual warfare prayer, blah, blah, blah. And I just had this thing that was like, this is a distraction. That's all it is. I don't need to have this perfect, weird spiritual warfare prayer to make them go away. They're just trying to distract me from the sermon. And then I was like, that's all it is. It's not The Exorcist. It's not The Exorcist of Emily Rose. It's not crazy. It's just they wanted to take me away from the sermon. And so I was like, okay, this is obvious. Went back, worked on the sermon, did it the next day, and everything was good. So I think sometimes we get wrapped up in the spooky stories, but a lot of times I just think it's just almost, you'd almost say childish. It's just simple stuff where you're like, okay, I see right through this. This is dumb. Yeah,
absolutely. And Pastor Jeff, he calls that parlor tricks. And I think it's a perfect illustration or description. And so we always say that, like, if you're experiencing that, those are parlor tricks that can't harm you. They can't do anything to you, but you're right. It's a distraction. They're just going to try to slow you down because they can't do anything else to you. And I always say this, like, if the demons, if Satan and his demons know your name, then you're doing something right. Because if you weren't, they wouldn't care. They'd leave you alone. And no, I appreciate that. I'll be honest. If Pastor Jeff was here, he would tell you every time. I mean, we're going, like I said, 12 years of this church, 14 years of ministry together. Every time we have something big coming up, we go through something weird. Like, we'll get sick. Right before someone will get sick or something crazy will happen, or, like every single time. And then every time it happens, then we're like, oh yeah, I should have expected that. We almost become numb to it. And, I have a similar story. Well, kind of to you, just even this last summer, I was preparing, we had we hosted the OSA national event here in July. And, it was a big event, and, there was a lot going on, and I was preparing a message called Christ or Chaos, and, specifically in the fight to end abortion. And like, I'm preparing this whole message in my mind, and like, And then like I started getting hit with stuff like that week before. And then like literally like, so this is July in Arizona where it's just, 100 million degrees. My AC goes out one day. And so that was one day. The next day, my oldest daughter, who was 10 at the time, got stung by a scorpion in her foot. And it was just like stuff like that started happening. I'm just like, and then literally I was like laying in bed and I was just like, duh. Like I was like, why am I surprised by this? And so then I'm literally preaching to myself when I'm getting ready to preach, that week. So yeah, I mean, even MacArthur, who wrote those books you're talking about, like Strange Fire and Charismatic Chaos, like he even has stories like of legit demonic stuff with like a little girl throwing a table across the room, stuff like that. So like, even he, who is very, very anti-charismatic stuff, will tell you the demons are real. So yeah, absolutely.
Man, that's interesting. Yeah, I was gonna ask you where you guys are at with MacArthur and some of his comments on the founding fathers. Maybe we say that for another time. I don't know. Are you familiar with any of that at all?
You'd have to remind me. I think I probably have heard. I'm just drawing a blank right now off the top of my head.
He said that like it was essentially like that the founding fathers were wrong for using violence, and that basically God. I saved the quote because I was going to ask you about it and see what your thoughts were on it, but I thought I had it here, but it was something along the lines of that. I mean, just saying that the founding fathers. So some of MacArthur's stuff I like, and then there's some things about him where I'm like, I'm not really following you. I don't know if where you guys are at with that. But
yeah,
I mean,
I can touch that quickly. I mean, like I said, I was discipled as a MacArthur, and I actually had to repent of some of that. but I love John MacArthur, and I'm incredibly grateful for him, and his teaching and his ministry has greatly shaped my ministry. Same with Pastor Jeff. He'll tell you that he thinks he actually truly turned to Christ through MacArthur. And so I owe a lot to that man. I don't, it's crazy because people are going to hear this and they're immediately going to get up in arms. It's usually what happens because if you touch the untouchables, people don't like it. I'm not levying any ad hominem attacks upon John MacArthur. I have issues with his theology, which I'm allowed to have. But as a man, I'm very grateful for him. I vaguely remember that being said. I mean, I would have a very direct disagreement with that because I would say that the founders were fighting a defensive war. It was very important to them that they did not fire the first shot. They waited until they were fired upon, and that's Lexington Green, the shot heard around the world. I have a 5-month-old son. We named him Jonas after Jonas Clark, who was the pastor of that. Like it was his congregation that was fired upon. And yeah, it was definitely a defensive war. They were not trying to be violent or use violence to get what they wanted. They were trying to live peaceably and freely. That's where the "Don't Tread on Me" comes from. That if you've probably seen the Gas and Flag,
of course, yeah,
which actually the Southwest pilots were hanging out of their they're out of their airplanes this week. But yeah, that's the whole purpose of that. Like a rattlesnake. Rattlesnake's cool if you leave it alone, and the snake's like, hey, leave me alone, I'm gonna live my life, I'm good. If you come near me, I'm gonna start rattling. If you mess with me, I'm gonna bite you. That's the whole idea behind it. That's what our founding fathers, like, that was what they want to do. They came over here to live in peace, to practice religion freely, without being under tyrannical law. And then the England came over and started messing with them, and so they had to bite back.
Yeah, I found the quote too, and we don't have to keep going on about it, but I'll just say this. So he said it violated Romans 13. He said the United States was born out of violation of New Testament principles. God's blessing bestowed on America have come in spite of the disobedience by the founding fathers. So again, that's what I'd read online. I found that on Wall Builders. If anybody wants to
Yeah.
look at it, it was where that quote was from. His book, Why the Government Won't Save You, I thought had some good points in it, but other things, I didn't quite follow. But in your guys' last podcast that came out on the 8th, the one where Pastor Jeff's talking about the TSA and when he was yelling, "They're grabbing my genitals," which made me laugh. I thought you guys did pretty good talking about that. But one thing too, before I forget, man, are you guys connected with Costi Hinn's church? I just read his book.
No, I mean we know who he is. He knows who we are, but we haven't connected.
But I mean, like, do you guys do events? Or are you guys friends at all, or do you connect at all?
We've tried, but then COVID hit.
Okay.
And that kind of, I'll be honest, he took a very different approach to handling COVID than we did.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he was definitely of the flavor of stay home, get vaccinated, wear the mask, social distance, all that stuff. And we've never, required any of that stuff. We always stayed open. So yeah, I think we'd have a hard time probably because just because of COVID right now. I think and I'm not want to say anything bad against him or anything, but there was a definite difference in opinion on how to handle that for sure. Oh,
I see. No, and that's fine. I actually first heard about him from one of you guys mentioning him because of his book, God, Greed, and the Prosperity Gospel.
Yeah,
which I read while my wife was in labor. But my wife loves that church. She likes to listen to their sermons. And
cool.
We've actually talked about doing a vacation, going to Tempi, spending one Sunday with you guys, and then another Sunday at Costi's church.
Oh, right on.
So yeah, maybe we'll do that.
So if I can, I don't. If you're going to change subject, because if you were, I was going to add something real quick.
You can add something.
Okay, cool. So going back to the government thing, that quote from MacArthur, I remember that was a while ago, right? Do you remember? Did you see the date on that?
I didn't think it was that long ago.
Oh, was it not that? I mean, his actions definitely say something different.
I was going to say that. Yeah, so his actions were totally different.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because when he took I was so thankful. I was so thankful of the stand he took last year with COVID and all that stuff. Like, I was so grateful for that. And, it was just funny. We laughed about it because people were praising him for doing that. And I was grateful for that, but I was like, "What? We've been saying this and doing this for months, and then now all of a sudden he's the hero." But it's it's who he is, and like I said, I'm super thankful because it spurred on other churches to do the same. But we were already doing that. But so I'll say this quick. I mean, back to Romans 13. And we've talked a lot about this, like you mentioned. We discussed this. On the 8th of the TSA thing, I've done like 2 or 3 shows. Well, actually 3 or 4 shows in the last month or two, covering the same subject with Gary DeMar, with Toby Sumter, with Davis Yount. And so Romans 13 has come up a lot.
Yeah.
And Todd Friel, who's tight with MacArthur, did a show recently on Wretched. I don't know if you saw this podcast or not, but he literally said, like, I would wear pinwheels on the side of my head if the government told me. And I was just like, okay, that's really silly. But when it comes to Romans 13, we have to look at the context of Romans 13. It says to obey the government, but like, what is Romans 13 is very, very clear of describing what the civil government's role is, what their authority is. And there's, God has ordained different spheres of government. There's self-government, family government, church government, and civil government. And civil government has its own specific roles, the authority that they have. And Romans 13 clearly says authority comes from God. He gives the government this authority to do these things. And so all these different spheres should complement and work together with one another, but they should never overlap. And so what we have is, if the government tells you to wear pinwheels on the side of your head, or the government forces you to get a cookie, the government forces you to wear a gold star, that is an overreach of their authority, and that is overreaching into your self-government sphere. And so looking at the ordained role of the government in that chapter, it's to protect the innocent and punish the evildoer. There literally says they're God's avenger of wrath to punish the evildoer. The word is diakonos there. It's the deacon. The government is God's deacon. And so they are to do the things that God has ordained governments to do. Yeah. Protect the innocent, punish the evildoer. Anything outside of that, they're overstepping their reach. And, one thing that Todd Friel said, and this is kind of I would call this the majority view within the church and our culture, is, you obey the government. Romans 13 says so. You do what it says. And especially, or they would say that the only time you can disobey the government is if they tell you to do something sinful. Then you can disobey them and have a good conscience about it. I grew up thinking that exact same thing. I remember growing up thinking like, oh man, if I speed right now, I'm not obeying the government and I'm in sin. But like, it's like, no, that's not actually the role God's given them. And, so I've asked these questions. I just said it, like, well, what if the government tells you to wear a gold star? That's not a sin issue. Are you in sin if you say, I'm not wearing that gold star? This was when we look at the thing in Afghanistan recently. I brought this up. I said, what if the government all of a sudden tells you, if you're a woman, that you have to wear a hijab, and if you don't, they're going to cut your head off in public? Is it a sin if you don't wear that hijab? And so like this isn't necessarily a black and white issue. There's a lot of gray area, and so we have to weigh those gray areas in the balance and really look at things. Is the government overstepping their reach from the authority God's given them? And I can give you numerous examples. What if the government tells you have to turn over your firearms? Are you going to do it? Because that's not necessarily a sin issue. And then we have Australia, and Australia is awful right now. They don't have firearms, so there's not a lot they can do. We get a lot of messages from people in Australia that are Christians. They're like, what do we do? I can't even go to church. They won't let us leave our houses, stuff like that. And I'm like, can you move? Can you leave Australia? Because that might be the best bet for you right now. Yeah. But then they have to have a pass to leave their house to get to the airport, So, yeah. Anyways, I'm rabbit trailing now, but like, I just wanted to make sure I took a second to address that whole question and that conversation.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I know you got to go soon, so I'm going to ask you, any books you've read that have been really or have been really influential. Yeah. Not just as a pastor, but in your life, in the church, things like Sure. that. But I will say this, man. I will take, I would love to have either you on again or anybody from Apologia I would have on here at any time. We can talk about books, going down rabbit trails, because eschatology, I wanted to ask some questions about some of Michael Heiser's books. I know you guys have done some things with him in the past, but all kinds of stuff that we could fill up time with. So, sure. I'd love to have you on again and anybody else from the church. But yeah, I mean, what other books, what are some books that have really helped you in your life?
Yeah. Well, first, I'd be honored to be on again. Just how to get a hold of me. And after we get off, I'll send you the email for our assistant. Cool. If you want to try to get Pastor Jeff on sometime. But so my number one favorite theology book is Mission of God by Joe Boot. I mentioned him. He's up in Canada. Joe's a good friend of ours. And we always say that the mission of God is like Apologia Church's manifesto. Yeah. You know this. Very rarely do you like read a theology book and agree with it 100%. Yeah. That doesn't happen. I do with this book. It's 700 pages, I think 750, something like that. And it's us in a book. And so I love that book. It's theonomic, postmillennial, reformed, presuppositional. Like it's everything that we are in one book, one volume. So that's always the number one book I recommend. It's a really, really incredible book. So there's that. I can kind of give you some of my favorites in different topics. So when it comes to Reformed theology, the Reformed Doctrine of Predestination by Lorraine Bettner is my favorite. When it comes to eschatology, He Shall Have Dominion by Kenneth Gentry. Greg Bonson, I can give you a number of books, but Always Ready by the Standard, Presuppositional Apologetics by Bonson as well. Those are some really good ones. When it comes to, well, by the Standard would be a book on theonomy. There's also Theonomy and Christian Ethics he did, which is another good one, which is really hard to find a copy of, actually.
Huh.
But let's see, those are good ones. God and Government by Gary DeMar. It's a big fatty, but that's a really great book as well if you want to look at just God and the spheres of government.
Yeah.
So I'm trying to think. Sovereignty of God by A.W. Pink is one of my favorites. That was very impactful on me as well. So those are some off the top of my head, some of my favorites.
No, that's cool. I got a whole stack of books next to me because of Apologia one way or another. One of them, Postmillennialism and Eschatology of Hope by Keith Matheson. I don't know if you've ever read that.
I have not.
The Bible Answer Man, Walter Martin, by Cindy Martin Morgan.
Yes.
Interviewed her. I got a copy of that.
Awesome.
A Serrated Edge by Douglas Wilson.
Yes, excellent.
Right before we came on, I was listening to him do like a little rebuttal thing of Joe Rogan making fun of Christianity.
I need to listen to that. I saw it pop up, but I haven't had a chance to.
Yeah. And I was actually listening to Joe Rogan like an hour ago, him talking to that guy from CNN, which was crazy fascinating. And you should check it out too.
Yeah.
The Roman Catholic Controversy by James R. White.
I know that guy.
And the Forgotten Trinity. I'm afraid of having James White on the show because he's a little too smart for me, I feel like. But I've thought about it, but I was like, I don't know, man. I'm kind of intimidated by that dude's intelligence. Not to say that I'm not of yours, of course, but
I'm not even the same level as him. So
yeah, his stuff is he goes deep, but
he's brilliant.
Guy. So yeah, man. But yeah, that's the first message I ever sent to Jeff Durbin. I messaged him on Facebook once and was like, "Hey, do you have some books I should read?" Because I'd only seen your stuff on YouTube, and he was like, on my podcast, we talk about books all the time. And then that's actually how I started listening to the show. So, I promote all of your shows, and I'll put them in the link. But, as far as podcast goes, you've got Apologia Radio, you've got Cultish, you guys are doing End Abortion Now. What else is out there that you want people to check out and promote if this is the first time seeing you?
I appreciate that a ton. Apologia Radio, you can so there's 4 podcasts that we produce here at Apologia Studios. So you can go to apologiastudios.com is our website. You can look us up on YouTube and Facebook. We produce Apologia Radio, Cultish, Sheologians, and Provoked. Those are the 4 podcasts we do. Let's see, there's Apologia Church. You can go to apologiachurch.com. Again, all of our sermons are in Apologia Studios, but we do have a Facebook page as well for that. End Abortion Now is our banner ministry to end abortion. So you go to endabortionnow.com. You can sign up with us in your church to go out to the abortion mill and preach the gospel and save babies. It's free. We'll get you kits to get you the stuff you need to get you started. And that's, God has totally blessed that. We are just about finished with year 4, going into year 5. And we have over 700 churches now, not just nationally, but in, I think, 7 different countries that are all under that banner. We've been able to help. So, God's definitely using that. We also just in 2020, started a 501c4, which is a lobbyist group. Actually, I'm wearing the shirt today. I didn't do that on purpose, but redstatereform.com, and then the abortion and ending abortion project of that is called Action for Life. You can go to takeactionforlife.org. So we view ending abortion, there's a dichotomy there. There's a prophetic side, which is end abortion now, and then there's a legislative side. which is take action or action for life. And we, so that's that thing. And then we just, as if I didn't have enough to do, we just started another 501c3 called Stand With Warriors. You can go to standwithwarriors.org. And that's a really, really crazy, cool thing that God just kind of dropped in our laps within the last 2 months. Actually, it's October, right? Within the last month. That started with us being invited to meet with some Navy SEALs who are Christians who are not taking the mandated cookie. And I'm trying to help you not get booted or get a strike. I know I appreciate it. So that's been really crazy and consuming a lot of our time in the last month. We have people from all over federal agencies. It started with just with a handful of Navy SEALs, and has grown to all branches of the military. We have all kinds of people from all federal agencies contacting us, whether it be CIA, Secret Service, FBI, ATF. We got Southwest pilots contacting us. It's been crazy. It's been really cool, but it's been crazy. And so we just started that. And so you can actually go there if you're interested in, basically what it is we started a nonprofit so that we could raise funds to help the legal costs of our military personnel who are saying no to tyranny. So that's what it's set up for, and purely goes towards that. So I think that's everything. Probably something I'm forgetting, but I think that's everything.
Well, who could blame you if you forgot one or two, man? You guys are doing a lot. It always blows my mind how much you guys do. So thank you for your time. It's truly an honor to have you on here, because I do know how busy all of you are, and I highly respect your time. So
I appreciate that.
So Luke, thank you for coming on, and thank you everybody for listening.
My pleasure, man. God bless.
Well, again, everyone, thank you for listening, and huge thank you to Luke and the team at Apologia for setting this up and taking the time out of their busy schedules to do this interview. As you could tell, they are a very busy team, and if you want to check out all of the things that they are involved with, take a look at the show notes. I've got it all linked below. Follow them on social media. And if you go to the bookbrilliant.com link, you can find every book that we referenced. Hopefully there's a couple that you want to check out. But again, Luke, thank you for doing the interview, and thank you for being influential in my walk as a Christian. You guys have no idea how much you've helped me. And again, everyone, thank you for listening. If it's your first time, please follow Book Brilliant on all social media and check us out. Thank you. Have a good day. Bye.